podcast from Peach 2020, hosted by Peter Martin.
Hello, I'm Peter Martin, founder of Peach 2020. Welcome to the latest in our series of Top Table podcasts, which will see me in conversation with some of the biggest names in the out-of-home food and drink business, the real movers and shakers, picking up on the issues shaping the future of our industry. The hospitality sector has been hit hard over the last 2 years. We all know that. But one organisation that's probably done more than most to keep us informed of the impact of the pandemic on the out-of-home market with its timely data and insight has been CGA, not least feeding our trade bodies here in the UK with up-to-date analysis to take back to government as part of their lobbying efforts. But with the focus now shifting back to the day-to-day business of running operations, what are the numbers telling us? What is the future shape, strength and resilience of the market, both here and globally? How are we all adapting to this new trading environment? Well, to answer, I'm absolutely delighted to say I have with me the Global CEO of CGA, Phil Tate. Welcome to Top Table. So, Phil, let's start with that big question. What is the state of the out-of-home market here and globally, if that's not too big a question to start with?
Yeah, it's a huge question, Peter. But I think, as you said, the market has been through a very difficult time over the last 2 years. Within the UK market, we saw over 100 billion wiped off of sales. But the one thing that we can say with certainty is that the market is coming back. It's been missed by consumers. There's that old adage, isn't there? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. And we've all missed those birthdays, celebrations and anniversaries over the last 2 years. And if there's anything the last 2 years and current circumstance has taught us, is to appreciate the moment. So we can see that in UK and globally, consumer confidence in the marketplace is coming back strong. But most importantly, their willingness and desire to come out is actually stronger than ever.
Of course, CGA now is global. Well, I mean, you are becoming more global. You've got offices already in Chicago, and you're monitoring other markets. What are you seeing in terms of comparison with what's happening here in UK?
It's a great question, and it very much depends on where those individual markets are in their individual battle against COVID. So within the UK market, starting here, we can see that from an operator perspective, we are pretty much back to where we were in 2019. Looking at our Coffer CGA business tracker, like for likes are very similar. From a drink sales perspective, we're actually above where we were in 2019 for the first time. In Ireland, however, the market was really hit with significant restrictions, and we're only just starting to see the bounce back come through. Same story in France, where restrictions were actually a bit longer than they were in the UK, but we can see the consumers starting to come back to the market, starting to get their confidence back, and that frequency of visit is increasing. And the beautiful part of our role is you're able to draw parallels between where markets are in different stages of recovery and almost predict and plot when that recovery will come through. And it's very positive for what we're seeing happening in France. And you go across the Atlantic and look at the US, and they're already ahead of where they were in 2019 from a value sales perspective. And then Australia, what we're seeing there is, again, before these latest set of restrictions came in, that market was higher than it was in 2019. Those markets have been deep and they've been long in terms of the restrictions that they're coming out of now, but we're anticipating that same bounce back.
Interesting, you get collecting all that data, but what are the key indicators you look at as part of your, the day-to-day work of the CGA teams?
It's really trying to take apart all of what you see in supply and demand, really. So we start with that view of what is the size and shape of the trading universe, what kind of outlets are opening, what kind of outlets are closing, to be able to take a view of how vibrant it is. We then go into looking at the consumers. What is consumer confidence like? How willing are they to come out into the marketplace? What do they want when they come out? And where do they go and why? We then contextualize that with the confidence of the business leaders who operate the venues in these marketplaces. But then it all comes down to sales, both for operators and major suppliers in the market. It's all about giving them a view of their sales in this really important sector.
So how do you collect that data?
That is a very, very detailed question, Peter, because basically one of the things is with us, we like to say we're a hospitality business that does research rather than a research business that happens to look at the hospitality market. We're 30 years old this year, and we've over that time period established a huge amount of trust and a huge amount of credibility, and therefore a lot of the market is willing to share that information directly with us. So within the UK, for example, we have over 85 different individual companies giving us their information that represents over 90% of the market. Same within the US, we have people giving us their information for over 200,000 outlets. France, very similar. We've got 250,000 outlets. It's about people sharing that information with us, which we then aggregate, harmonise, model and play back.
So let's look at the consumers. They're pretty fundamental because they drive sales at the end of the day. Are we seeing any changes with customers? You say all your data across the world is showing that people are coming back to bars and restaurants, different rates because of the different restrictions we've seen. But have consumers changed? Have their choices changed?
Very much so. And it's how much of this is here to stay then becomes the big question. But we can see that when markets first come out of their COVID restrictions, people are almost tiptoeing back into the marketplace. They need to rebuild their confidence. And as a result, we've seen a significant increase globally of the more casual, lower tempo occasion growing through. And we can see in the UK, for example, that's gone from 20% of occasions pre-COVID to 35% post-COVID. And that's pretty typical of what we're seeing globally. The higher tempo occasion, with obviously the pressures around city centres that we'll no doubt come on to talk about, and the fact that the high tempo marketplace has suffered more restrictions, those occasions have declined. But one of the biggest things that's been in growth is the treat occasion. So we've all obviously, again, made those sacrifices over the last 2 years, and people want that affordable luxury when they come out. And therefore, we're seeing a significant growth in that treat. And then one of the things we have seen an unfortunate decline in pre versus post-COVID is the romantic occasion. It appears that with working from home, we all feel like we've spent enough time with our loved ones, and therefore we're looking to go out for a more casual occasion with friends. And we've actually seen an 8% decline in the romantic occasion in on-premise.
Unintended consequences, eh? Yeah. I suppose that's that interesting point. What's the difference between a treat and a romantic experience? I mean, is a treat people just treating themselves rather than treating families or whatever? Because it is interesting. It's a matter of where the context is. Because if people aren't necessarily going out to typically high tempo nightclubs or whatever, it's more staying local, as I think we've also seen, is, what constitutes a treat?
I think it's what constitutes a treat at the moment is people are actually willing to spend a little bit more money on something that they feel gives them value for experience. Again, we can see it taking place in different parts of the world at the moment, where people have, in some instances, got more disposable income at the moment because of the restrictions over the last 2 years. And they're coming out with that mentality of, I deserve this is my reward, I'm going to spend a little bit more money, be that with my partner or be that with a wider friendship group. And they're going out and they're looking for something that delivers them an experience. And ideally an experience they can share.
I mean, it's interesting. Our senses, though, I mean, who's coming out more? Is it younger people coming out earlier because they have less concerns, and perhaps older people are more dubious about going out and more cautious? Is that a real trend?
It definitely is a real trend. And again, what you can see is that play through based upon where markets are in their recovery. So with how the UK is at the moment, you can sometimes forget where other markets are in terms of how they are coming out of things, because our restrictions are gone now on the whole. And we're actually in the UK starting to see the older 55 consumers starting to come back again. It's taken up until this point for it to happen. It very much was the younger consumers, as you said. Those younger consumers were making up over 70% of visits. But what you can see is now that older consumer, they've seen, they feel more confident, they're starting to edge back out. But that is the UK. Take that into markets like Canada, where there's very much a view that it's about the vaccine passports. Take it to Australia, where those markets are only coming out of restrictions over the last couple of weeks. It's going to take more time for that confidence to come back.
Yeah, I mean, do you think some of those experiences are transferable, for future reference if things change in different markets? Are there things we can learn, say, in the UK from what's happening elsewhere, do you think?
It definitely is transferable. And we did a study last year where we did 20 markets and we interviewed over 25,000 consumers, and we're literally about to repeat that same piece of research in March. And you could group markets into where they were in their stages and almost take the learnings from one and transplant it into another. I think ironically at that point, so many markets were in a similar state. But now, because of where the UK is, it's actually a lot of markets are looking to us to see what they can learn. And it's about those 4 stages of almost the recovery, where consumers are first of all looking to reconnect. People come out, it's lower tempo occasions, it's more sedentary occasions, it's earlier in the day. They're then feeling a bit more re-energized and they're starting to go back to the city centres and they're starting to explore more. But then it's all about re-establishing the experience, and therefore it's out. I am out, as the expression goes. I want Instagrammable moments. I want new drinks. I want new experiences that I can be the first to tell my friends about. And the final R is re-establishing their norms. And it's taking all the pre-COVID behaviours, combining them with these new behaviours we've got now to have what is the new normal going forwards. And it's interesting because this time last year, we were looking at what we could learn from the US and what we could learn from Australia. And now actually those guys are looking over here to see what they can take from our behaviours.
I mean, if you look at some of the data you guys deliver to the market, supposedly we're seeing sort of an increase in the cocktail craze, which sort of happened in lockdown. I think one of the bits of data I think is quite interesting that spirit sales have bounced back quicker, say, than wine sales, which might indicate again that younger people are going out more than older people might do. What's your sense? Are these permanent changes in the market or just temporary?
I think the certain trend you're talking about there is going to be permanent. And I don't think that's about age group. I think actually that particular trend there around cocktails comes back to experience. People want something that they haven't been able to experience at home. We've all been able to have certain things at home over the COVID period, but having a cocktail delivered by an expert bartender in a way that cuts through and is absolutely amazing service, and it's a fantastic drink. As talented as some of us have got at home over the last 2 years, you're still not able to do it to the quality that the best bartenders can. And therefore, when we've seen people come back out, and again, this is globally, it's not just something we're seeing in the UK. Our data in US, in Canada, in Australia, in France, in Ireland is all showing cocktails booming. It's because people want something they haven't been able to have for the last 2 years.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, because the focus of CGA's business is really on drink. I mean, your biggest clients are the drinks companies. We'll talk a bit about them in a moment. But in terms of overall sort of alcohol sales and soft drink sales as well, I mean, what are the trends? Are they getting back to pre-pandemic levels, or have they shifted? Is there more premium? Perhaps less volume, more premium. I mean, what's the shape of things in terms of the sales graphs?
They're starting to look positive. So again, if you look at the UK market, we're now getting to the point where we're slightly ahead of 2019 levels. Canada, actually 5% more consumers came out in February than they did in January, and we're starting to see the confidence return there. So while we're a little bit off pre-2019 levels, so we're not far away. US is ahead of 2019. And you're right, it breaks down into that I'm out and I want to have that experience. And we're seeing people trading up to those premium brands. They want to reward themselves, they want to see it as part of the experience, and they're going for premium.
So a lot of people, who listen to our podcast are on the operator side of the business, both here and in the States and other parts of the world as well. But what's the mood within the drinks companies? Because obviously you deal with them sort of on a day-to-day basis. And I think there was probably a sense during pandemic because bars were closed, restaurants were closed around the world. The off-trade wasn't. And I think so there was a sense of perhaps a worry that drinks companies wouldn't come back to the on-trade, wouldn't favour the on-trade perhaps the way they've done. What's their mood? What's their sense and their attitude to the on-premise?
I actually think it's stronger than ever. And the reason for that is partly we've been able to show them the role that the on-premise plays in terms of creating that emotional connection with consumers. It's always been something that has been thought is the case, but we've actually been able to use our data to prove it is the case. And we can actually show drink suppliers that in some markets, up to 60% of all purchasing, be it on or off trade, is actually driven by what's happened in the on trade, because that's where they've had that emotional connection with a brand. It dictates what they drink. They have that emotional and loyal connection to it. And therefore, they take that behaviour into the off-premise. And therefore, while on-premise was closed, we found that a lot of people were still making their off-premise decisions on what they buy based upon how they had created these emotional connections with brands in on-premise. So coming out of this, we're seeing that a lot of the drink suppliers are seeing that the on-premise is more important than ever. They're looking at how they continue to create really dynamic activations that create that loyalty and create that emotional connection. But equally, they see it as part of their role within what is a complex ecosystem to support the on-premise and get it back up to speed. And they're doubling down on that.
It's interesting what sort of shape, as it were, the drinks brand owners, the drinks market is, the supply side is. Are we going to see more innovation? I mean, what can we expect from the drinks companies, big and small? Are we going to be dominated by some of the big brands, big players, or is there still a lot of room for innovation? Some of the things we've seen over recent years with, say, craft beer and craft gin, which are global phenomena.
There's definitely going to continue to be an influx of NPD. The one thing about these major drink suppliers is they certainly don't rest on their laurels. And what we can see is a significant pipeline of NPD that's coming through. What we know about the modern consumer is why they are highly engaged in the on-premise. They're also very promiscuous in their choices. So they very quickly move on to what is next. So you called out gin there. Gin is having a period where it's starting to actually plateau. Operators are starting to rationalise their range within gin as consumers are looking for what is the next big thing. And we can see a lot of operators are starting to engage with drink suppliers around new innovative serves. We can see people starting to look at tequila, people starting to look at rum. On the front bar, there's obviously big investment that's going into light beers. We're seeing a lot of investment that's going into serve innovations to try and reinvigorate that draft experience. So I think for a consumer who is, forgive the pun, thirsty for new experiences and for innovation, they're not going to have to look far for it with the drink suppliers at the moment.
So it's competitive as ever then, the drinks market?
More competitive, I would say, because operators are also looking at how they maximise their space and in some instances rationalising that space down. And therefore, for the drink suppliers, they are competing over what is some now prime real estate that is shrinking.
Now, one of the other changes we've seen in the market, we've talked about consumers, we've talked about the supply chain, but it's actually as it were, the terrain of the market as well. And certainly some of our big cities globally have taken a lot longer to come back. I'm in London at the moment. London is busier, but we also know some of the commuters aren't. The City of London footfall is still not anywhere near back where it was, perhaps where the West End is. What are we seeing there? Are we seeing a change in our major cities like London and New York? Is this going to be a permanent shift? And what do you think the impact is going to be on hospitality?
Well, I think we're going to have to evolve, is the reality of it, because what is driving this is the change in how we work. So we know for a fact that the after-work drink occasion has declined by 24% globally. And in fact, that's been replaced to some degree by date night or family night that's actually taking place in the suburbs. So people are working more local, so therefore they're staying more local. Even within the city centres, we're seeing that because people are working from home, they're actually going out earlier in the evening and coming home earlier in the evening. 57% of consumers globally are saying they expect remote working and hybrid working is here to stay. So we did some exclusive research last year for the Atlantic Club trip that we did as part of Peach 2020 that showed in some of these city centres, sales were down double digit. And while I don't think it will stay at those levels, I definitely think it will come back. To get people back, it's going to have to deliver on experiences. And it will come back because people crave those experiences. They crave those big nights out. And you can have those out in a city centre in a way that you can't in the suburbs. But we're going to have to be fleet of foot to capitalise on those opportunities, see that they're probably going to take place on different days, but also they may take place in different day parts. And we're already seeing some of the city centres globally start to react to this by trying to encourage a higher degree of urban living to get people back into the city centres and then get them into the trade that way.
Yeah. So you're still fairly optimistic, but it's going to be a different route back to success for some operators then.
I'd say I'm more than fairly optimistic. I think from the consumer research we see, I'm very, very optimistic about the future of the on-premise. I think what it means, though, is it's going to evolve and change, and we're almost back. We're going to see almost 2008 levels of evolution when the smoking ban came in and there was a wholesale shift in where people drank, how they drank, premiumization versus polarization. I genuinely think we're in for that level of upheaval over the next 2 years. But what comes from that is innovation. And what I love about our sector is we're incredibly resilient and we're incredibly innovative. And you'll see a whole load of new things coming through in terms of operator offerings.
So what about CGA? Yeah, you're pretty ambitious. And I mean, for full disclosure, obviously, we worked closely together, Phil. And this last year, we've taken the old Peach events business out and put them into a separate company with Atlantic Club, allowing you to focus 100% on the data and insight business, but not just far from being in the UK. Tell us a bit about the size of the business now and where you want to take it.
Yeah, well, we're on a journey, really. When I joined CGA, we were 17 people and GB focused. We're now approaching 200 people. We have outlet databases in 30 countries, consumer research in over 20. And we're looking to get our share measurement services into over 8 countries by the end of this year. So I'd say that we're massively ambitious for the business. And what comes with that is we're massively ambitious for our people. What I love about our business is we grow our own and we bring people through the business as a proper meritocracy should. But we want to bring our share measurement services to over 25 countries over the next 5 years because we believe this is a really important sector, a really important industry that isn't measured to the degree it should be to allow people to combine the art and the science. The people who operate in this business and in this sector, they understand the art. We want to then bring the science to allow them to combine the two.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the drink side is key, but obviously you're picking up food trends as well. What's the food side of the on-trade looking like at the moment?
It's funny, really, because it kind of replicates the same consumer mindset. So people are looking for choice. People are looking for experimentation. People want to see things like vegan options. People want to see increased vegetarian options. They want to understand that things are locally sourced. That is clearly something big that's coming through within food. And they also want to know it's sustainable. And we're going to have to communicate those offerings to our consumers in a way that is accessible in order for them to keep coming back, because we've seen a lot more of consumers are starting to do research on menus before they ever cross the threshold of our venues. And we need to make sure we're serving up this kind of information to allow them to make those informed choices.
I mean, looking at coming out, you talked about how tricky the market will be, but there's a lot of ambition on the supply side as well. But we are seeing a lot of pressure on supply chain, particularly on prices. And that's why I mentioned food, because there's obviously a lot of food costs, but also those raw material costs are going to happen on the drink side as well. Whether that's coming out of COVID, whether it's a geopolitical situation, what are you seeing in terms of price pressures and how are people coping with it, particularly on the supply side?
I think the question breaks down into both price, but also the ability to fulfill orders. So you had Andrew Selly on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, which I made sure I was listening to. And clearly he's more expert than talking about supply chain, but from what we see is raw materials have been an issue. Not just raw materials, but packaging. So glass and aluminium has been really hard to come by. Getting product to where it needs to be and when it needs to be there has not been straightforward for not just food suppliers, but the major drink suppliers as well. And this is in some instances straining relationships. We're seeing stocking policies change rapidly based upon what products are available to operators and what aren't. And people are also having to change where they buy their product from in order to be able to fulfill some of the stocking policies that they've got. So I think one thing's clear is our sector's been bouncing from major issue to major issue over the last 2 years. And each one of these on its own would be considered a significant issue, and we've had to just deal with one after the other. But I think one of the other things I love about our market is how when times are tough, we pull together. And you can really see the community of the on-premise at the moment where suppliers and operators are having to have some difficult conversations around supply, but they seem to be pulling together to see how they can do it.
So if you take this global view, which you obviously do now, Phil, as you're researching more markets, I mean, how are you seeing things? Are global markets becoming more the same in terms of, drink sales, food sales, or are you finding interesting pockets of innovation out there which other parts of the world can learn from? I mean, what's your experience? Is it still you seem to think it's still a very exciting place to be. So if there is, what are you finding out there in perhaps some of the corners of the world?
It's a fascinating market to work in, and I think what happens is you get a series of what we call mega trends, and those mega trends are things that basically transcend geography. Those mega trends are things like what we've already discussed: the rise of experience being king, how loyalty is in decline, how the rise of the suburbs, how people are looking more into alfresco dining and eating and drinking. But then once you get past those mega trends, within each individual market, they all have their own nuances and they all have their own areas where it is completely unique to that sector. So I don't see the UK embracing Clamato flavoured beer like we see in other areas of the world. You can see that in Australia, there's a huge drive behind just purely local Australian beers as they come out of COVID restrictions, huge loyalty towards that at the moment. You can see that I think the tequila trend within the US is destined to continue in terms of its growth, whereas compare that to other areas of the world and it's all about rum. In some areas of the world, it's about the classic cocktails making a huge resurgence. In other areas, it's about innovation around cocktails. Literally every market has its own individual story to tell. And that's why it's so fascinating to be able to get into the detail of it in the way that we are.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about local. I was just been talking to Simon Mitchell at Curb, and there's this, even here in London, there's a great demand for local operators, local tastes. And that seems to be a trend which has come through, certainly in the UK. And you're saying in Australia as well, other places that it's staying close to a market as well as being part of a global marketplace.
100%. It's definitely that local trend is something that was there pre-COVID, but it has almost been amplified by COVID. So obviously people are supporting their local businesses, people are supporting their local economy, but equally therefore people are choosing more their local brands as well. And that obviously gives a challenge to some of the global brand operators, and it's how do you appeal both global and local? And what we've seen from our consumer research is you can be a global brand, but as long as you invest in local initiatives, it almost carries the same resonance. And therefore, it still gets that same kind of halo effect that you're looking for from just being local.
So with this new global view of the world, Phil, how's your life changed? I mean, how's your role evolving?
My days have got longer as the time zones to compensate for those. But the beauty of where we are as a business now is, and I know this sounds cheesy, but it's absolutely true. I have an absolute brilliant team who will trust in each one of those regions and each one of those time zones to be running the businesses in those areas in the way that they could be, and should be, and delivering great service as a result. But in terms of my day, I know it sounds again cheesy, but I love my job. I love making sure that our sector has access to the best quality insights that it does. Start my day, get up, I'll be checking my emails of what came in from the US, see my family for breakfast, come into the office, work the GB hours, then go home and catch up with the APAC emails. But it's a fortunate and privileged position to be in, that our business is trusted enough by these operators and brand owners to be taking our services out to them.
So, with all this knowledge, Phil, and you say talking back to a mainly UK audience, what is your biggest prediction for the UK market? What's the top tier? What's the thing we should be looking out for this year?
That's a great question, Peter. I think the emergence of premium locals where they're going to be held to city centre standards, I think that is something that is going to, people who operate in that space are going to win, because we're demanding, we're discerning consumers, and we want the best. And I think sometimes we want to stay local and have those experiences, and people who can execute that will win. I also think we are going to continue to demand experience and experiential outlets and venues, and those places will also continue to win. I think a challenge for operators, well, not like they needed another one, is how to operate in a market that's going to polarize. So we're going to see people who are out, and just the very fact that they're out is the treat in itself. And they're going to want accessible quality at an entry-level price point. But in exactly the same venue, you're going to have someone who's out with that weekend millionaire mindset, and they want a luxury experience. And both are going to demand quality as standard, but to be out of the same venue has to be able to deliver those two experiences. And again, I think that will be the ones who win can do it.
So we come back to treats. What's a treat look like for Phil Tate?
Oh, what does a treat look like for me? An amazing steak with some beautiful red wine, followed up with copious amounts of rum and tequila. And you know I like a rum, Peter, because I think you still have the hangover to prove it from a couple of years ago, don't you?
I think you're probably right. So I might leave you to have that treat on your own, Phil. Anyway, Phil Tate, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
This series of podcasts is sponsored by Bidfood, Fourth, Stint and Zonal. The Peach Podcast is always free to listen to. To find us, search Peach 2020, the top table, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or in any app that supports podcasts. All our podcasts will be uploaded to our YouTube channel too. Now, don't forget to like, rate and subscribe to make sure you don't miss our future episodes.
Podcast from Peach 2020, hosted by Peter Martin.